Barbara, it is so good to see you. And you are beaming in from Clearwater, Florida, where you've been for a number of years after a decorated career as a lawyer and as a theologian, as seminary president, educator. But our fondest memories are sitting with you over Vietnamese pho in Memphis 20 years ago. That's where we got to know you and just fell in love with your spirit. And we've had some lovely collaborations over the years, but we haven't seen you for a bunch of years. So it's so great to see you. Thank you for coming on with us.
Well, I'm just delighted to be with the Bartimaeus Kinsley Institute today. You and Elaine and I have a rich history of friendship, teaching, and a lifelong commitment to justice. And I'm so glad to have this conversation with you.
So you've long worked at the intersection of justice and spiritual transformation in a variety of settings, as a lawyer, in educational, but also in alternative institutions, such as the one that you're working with now. You've, as a Black female leader, you've dealt with so many challenges. And what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced? And now as you look at the terrain, because you've seen a lot of change, not enough, but some, what are the signs of hope that you see today as you kind of survey the landscape?
Well, each of the contexts that I served in had its own joys and its own sorrows. I mean, the work in the streets when I was younger suited me best. And I think it's, selfishly, it allowed me to engage my body, my mind, my soul. It also allowed me to sense the potential and energy of the community at its most powerful. But what I learned as I got older was that direct action has its usefulness because it draws attention to particularly violent displays of injustice. But outrage can't be sustained for any long period of time by anybody. And besides, systems of repression respond to street action in very superficial and immediate ways, always. And it seldom includes the deep and enduring roots of change that we need. I mean, take example, the Aunt Jemima thing. George Floyd gets murdered before our eyes, and they changed the pancake from Aunt Jemima to something else, her actual name. Big deal. How does that change anything? So we have to learn what the structures of oppression do, how they work, and realize that we've got to do more than just be in the streets. So the other context was teaching, and I think that's the best translation of street activism, because you're training another generation to do the work. I mean, you just left Memphis, I understand. And as you know, many of the people that we trained at the seminary are now leading that movement. I turn on CNN and there they are, they're doing the work. So it's challenging. Each aspect was challenging, but I think the most challenging was institutional work. Serving as a dean, serving as a president of institutions, because the spirituality of institutions, I agree with Walter Wink, there is an angel in those places. If you do not address that angel in the right ways, change cannot happen. And so you wear yourself out trying to make change when the angel wants stasis, good or bad. And the work that you do, it's like a rubber band, snaps back. Yes, they do good, but it seldom lasts very long. So that was the most challenging, I think.
I remember talking with you when you were still at United and in Minneapolis, and you saying, I just take the point of view that if they don't like what I'm doing, they can fire me, but I'm not going to stop doing what I do. And so that sort of fierceness and singular determination has really helped you deal with the principalities that you encounter in these institutions.
Yeah. You have to be willing to know what you're called to do. And what I knew was I wasn't called to stay there. They had had many 10-year presidents. They have another person in place now who will be there 10, 15 years. I knew that wasn't my call. My call was to come in there, make change, handle their discomfort, their white liberal discomfort with a Black leader, and then go. And I knew when the time was right to go. And so I was able to set up a move that would get them off that campus before COVID hit.
Yeah.
They were in the back of a suburb with no students, very few students. They needed to get to a major city and set up a real operation. So we had all of that in place. I knew they wouldn't follow me off that campus, but they would follow a white male. And so when it was time to go, I knew it was time to go, and I left. And they did ultimately leave just in time. So the campus got relocated in St. Paul, and they're doing well. So I did what, I was called to do, and I'm very satisfied with the work there.
Thank you. I've wanted to ask this question. I have been researching intergenerational trauma and moral injury in my Mennonite community from Saskatchewan over the last decade. And I've often used a quote from your book, Unspeakable Joy. And you write, "There is no response other than radical love that is up to the task of healing transgenerational wounds. Questions that we lay on those inner altars and that receive no response in one generation are handed down to the next." End quote.
Deep.
So powerful. Can you elaborate on this magnificent vision a little bit, how you became persuaded of its truth and how you build capacity for this work?
Well, at the time that I wrote that, I was unaware of how pervasive biogenetic trauma was. I knew about intergenerational trauma, but I had no idea about the damage it does to your cells, to your genes, until I learned about the work of Dr. Rachel Yehuda,
Yes.
who is a medical expert in intergenerational transmission of trauma. And she found that the genes of future generations are altered by trauma. That means, so you have the Holocaust, you have the Trail of Tears, you have slavery. It not only wreaks havoc on those who are immediately affected, but also on their progeny. So the scientists persuaded me of the truth of the matter, but they didn't have the answers that were demonstrably effective. They weren't effective. I mean, the psychiatry, the talk therapy, many folks have noticed that it doesn't have lasting effects, and yet there are effective responses to trauma. They are counterintuitive. There's lament, there's art, there's storytelling. There's drumming, there's movement, there's dance, allowing the body to release the trauma. Native American Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart talks about the power of ritual and allowing people to either reclaim or recreate ritual that allows them to dispel trauma in a kind of permanent way. They put it somewhere, it's there, they can tell their stories about it, but they don't have to carry it in their bodies. So what I'm finding is leading trauma researchers are moving away from discursive and moving more to somatic, meaning that let's talk more body work, including dramatic reenactments and narrative and poetic reframing and yoga and intensive breath work. So that's what convinced me of the truth of that. I don't know that we've solved that problem because we are inflicting trauma even now on the generation that lives. When you watch a video that has been playing for days now about the murder of the young man in Memphis, that's traumatizing. It's not just traumatizing to people of color, it's traumatizing to anyone who sees it. What does that do as we pass on the trauma? We have no place to put that trauma. Going to church isn't going to fix that trauma. I don't know what praying is going to do about that trauma. We need places, ritual places of release to help to heal what is happening to us on a daily basis. That's why I like the work of Bayo Akomolafe. And he talks about the ways in which we handle trauma and raise Res Menachem. He talks about the ways in which you handle trauma. You can't pretend it's not there because it just festers and creates internal wounds. You asked me, and I didn't really answer you because I got tied up and the problems of institutional work. But you asked me about my hope. And that seems to be kind of a ridiculous thing to even think about in these days. But I have always said my hope has to have legs. My hope has to have wings. Better know how to fly. And what I mean by that is my hope is not a wishful expression of unfulfilled dreams. It just isn't. It's the enactment of divine purpose. It is self-actualization, and it is an attempt to fulfill the collective will of people who imagine more than systems can offer.
Mm, mm, mm,
Anything else is delusion.
mm, mm. You know, you in your in your body of work, you yourself moved from the streets to the seminary through the sanctuary. In the last couple of decades, you have developed this well-earned reputation as a curator of soma and spirit. That's a conundrum for the Christian tradition, which has enjoyed such a monopoly, institutional monopoly over that phase in so many parts of our society. But what are resources in the traditions of Christian spirituality that you can commend to folks? And for white folks who are disillusioned with church, and that's many of the folks who come to our Bartimaeus Institutes, what cautions or advice do you have about drawing on other spiritual traditions without cultural appropriation that is so typical of white supremacy?
Well, the first thing I would do is say to them very kindly, you're not white. White is not a race. It's a designation of power and privilege. So why don't, as a white person, you seek your own origins? Do your DNA, honor your ancestors, figure out who you are, then claim that. Are you Irish? Are you Italian? Are you German? Stop calling yourselves white for all of our sakes. Learn about the African desert fathers and mothers. Then go back to regular Christian church history that you think you know, and realize that many of the people that you have heard of were Africans. Tertullian, Perpetua, Felicity, Clement of Origen, Origen of Alexandria, Cyprian, Athanasius, and Augustine of Hippo, Africans. Then, is this enough to do? Learn about the libraries and schools of Timbuktu back to the 4th century and their scholars. Know about the 27 known writing systems of enslaved Africans, including Sibidi, Ajama, Mende, Giz, to name just a few. Many of them combinations of Arabic and local dialect. Then read more modern predecessors like Howard Thurman. I'm an African American, didn't meet him until seminary. Part of the civil rights movement, didn't know he was an advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. Then learn about Thea Bowman, a Black Franciscan sister. And someone I just learned about this week, Dr. Leon E. Wright, the first Black Buddhist Congregationalist who taught Buddhism in the 60s, authorized by those in India. Then learn about new young Black contemplatives like Cole Arthur Riley. Do your homework. And then talk amongst yourselves and dispel the myths. As far as cultural appropriation goes, learning and applying what you learned in your own community is fine. It becomes a problem when, as a newcomer to another culture, you begin to exploit the cultural treasures for your own gain. That's a problem. You also asked me about capacity, Elaine, and I really want to talk about building capacity.
Come on.
I mean, all of us cannot be doing the same work at the same time. Some of us have to be in the streets to call the systems into accountability. But not all of us have to do that at the expense of building something new. So how do you dismantle corrupt systems, banking, economics? It isn't with direct attacks or demonstrations. You have to create another way to pool the community's resources. Some of us have to be about the work of reframing and rebuilding. I am of the mind now at this point in my life that the old structures cannot be reformed. I know Walter Wink says they can be redeemed. They can be redeemed because we walk away from them. We build something new, and then we invite them in. It is not our job to tear down the old systems. It is our duty to walk away.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I feel like you have given us so much wisdom and so much courage and ways to move forward. Our last question that we'd like to ask is, what exhortations, what can you add, would you give to our people that are gathered this week? The people here at the Bartimaeus Kinsler Institute are yearning to walk and work for justice. And so how can we maintain our spiritual and emotional equilibrium amidst often overwhelming odds in our work of curating faith and justice?
Oh, I love that question. I think justice seeking is at its most powerful when we don't try for predetermined outcomes. All we're told biblically, if you're going to start with the Bible, is to resist. The devil will flee from you. Resistance is all we're told to do. Remembering, of course, that justice seeking is picking a fight with spiritual entities. None of us, together or alone, have the capacity to engage such a fight without the guidance of the Holy Spirit. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and the rulers of darkness in high places. So don't measure your success by even the numbers of folks who are involved. I've had so many people say to me, but we're so small in number. Well, your group may be small, but perhaps you're not supposed to be the whole loaf of bread. Maybe you're just the yeast, causing things to rise and bubble and get the people activated. Leave the baking to the baker. Teach another generation. That's the richest legacy each of us can teach. And then finally, develop a rich contemplative inner life. It will serve you well in good times and bad.
Let me just follow up on that, because you are, you are someone who has integrated contemplative practices with a deep commitment to justice and to theological integrity. And you know that there's a fair bit of spiritual nonsense around the place. What do you invite folk in terms of contemplative practices that can remain rooted in the struggle for life in the streets?
It has to be a well-rounded approach. I am not one who believes in only one tiny sliver of the contemplative life as something that is going to feed me or allow me to feed the community. So that means that, yes, while I will sit in silence, I also know that there are contemplative moments in community through group sayings. You used to do this all the time, Ched. I used to watch you change the atmosphere in a room We'd all be waiting for something to begin, and you'd start with a song, of all things. And by the time people were finished singing, the air had changed. And so, I mean, you have to take it all in. You have to know your church history. You have to understand that diversity and differentiation is the way of the universe,
Well,
and that you're part of that.
yeah.
That change is what's going to happen. God says, I make all things new. It is processive. This entire solar system is being pulled towards something. We don't know what. We are not static. We are not left with history, rooted in history, but we must know our history. So with your divine spirit consultations and contemplation, with your knowledge of history, with your engagement socially in the community, and your willingness to serve, you now have a well-rounded package so that you're not off on a tangent, singing mantras all day without taking care of the poor, or you're not serving the poor till you burn out without taking care of your spirit. It's a full-time job. Being well-rounded is a full-time job. Because even, no matter how you try, I'll find I've been sitting for too long, staring at my navel. I need to get up and go feed the homeless or something. So there is this need to feed your intellect, to feed your spirit, to feed the community. What did Jesus say? Feed the people.
Well, I think our folks can see why we were so anxious to have them meet you as a prophet of joy, as a wise elder. And I'm wondering if we could ask you just to offer a blessing to the folks in this room, because you've given us such a gift. Would you do that for us, Barbara?
Sure. First, I wish you joy in the midst of all of the chaos. I wish mystery, enigma, conundrum. May the world surprise you. May God surprise you. You have not yet seen the depth of your potential. Be open, be wise, stay woke, for your time is yet coming.
Wow.
Be blessed in all that you do.